Yeah, we're live. We're live.
Okay, we're live. Welcome, everybody, to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. And it's Friday, the 11th of April. And today is one of our housing days, and we're going to focus today on some unfinished work. We're going to, as you may recall, we had a joint hearing. Well, it seems like a long time ago on the landlord-tenant eviction task report. I remember us being all together upstairs in the House General. And so we're going to have the chair of that task force come and talk to us. But I want us to figure out how we can finish this work and who we should task it to. And because this is evictions updates that we need to do. And so to present the opportunity to us, we welcome Emily Krasnow back to the chair. Join us. And John Gray was actually the lawyer.
Yes.
Working with you on this.
He's unavailable, but we have Cameron is up to speed. But yes,
is always a quick study.
He is, but yes, for the record, Rep. Emily Krasnow, Chittenden 9, South Burlington. So John Gray was the legislative counsel for our study committee over the fall. Studies.
And you have on your desks the report.
Yes.
Which I think, so anyway, Emily, if you give us a sort of
I'll give
a high level review, because
refresher.
it's been many months since we were there.
And in
everybody
in legislative time, that can feel like it's when we're working on so many things. So I'll just give one more little high level intro to refresh folks' memories. So the landlord's tenant study committee, which was comprised of legislators and non-legislators and included representatives for both tenants and landlords, as well as members representing the judiciary and DHCD, was tasked with reviewing issues from Vermont's landlord tenant laws and current eviction process. The committee met 6 times to take testimony from stakeholders and experts, including from the judiciary, state housing experts, national and state advocacy groups, and property managers. At each meeting, the committee also provided space for public comment. And so that was a really important piece of the study committee, was that I felt as chair, it would be really important at every meeting to have time for public comment.
And you'll see here on like the 3rd page, there is a whole pro-con, tenant concerns, landlord concern, public comment.
Yep. And so then we can dive into some of the themes from the report, from those comments. One issue on which tenants and landlords agree was that we can't talk about landlord-tenant issues without talking about housing availability and affordability, which both our committees have been working very hard on this year. Those kind of go hand in hand. So we talked about affordable housing, eviction proceedings, the current issues facing tenants and landlords, policy proposals in the landlord-tenant space. So some of the proposals were that you'll see in the report, rental registry.
So the recommendations, I believe, are on the back page. Is that what you're jumping to?
Yeah.
Okay, the recommendation. So the public comment is sort of on page 3, and is on page 3, and the recommendations are on page 22.
Yep. So they ranged from, it was really important to me to hear from people all over the state, both landlords and tenants. And I did a lot of outreach throughout the state to make sure that people were aware of this, that it was happening, because I think oftentimes study committees can go under the radar and we don't have as much robust engagement. So we had people from, I don't really like to call it sides, but we had people from both spaces that talked about, and there was agreement. And I think, you all and us upstairs as well agree that we have to, at some point, we can't keep kicking the can on this issue, and that there are some things that could help both landlords and tenants policy wise that legislators can work on. So while we did not, again, reminding folks, and I know that could be frustrating, that we did not take an official position on, okay, here's what we think the legislature should go forward and do. Our committee met a consensus that we put these recommendations in place so that policymakers or a committee could then take the recommendations, have people to testify queued up, have their information. And so we have seen a number of bills, this year, in both the House and Senate with some omnibus, suggestions.
So we had Tanya,
Right, I saw
last
that.
Friday, Tanya came and presented her, sort of, her bill, which incorporates a lot of, many of the, not necessarily the recommendations of the committee, but the addresses the issues she felt were critically important for us to address. So you came up with recommendations. What you didn't do with, of course, we were all hoping for, and you guys started extremely late. I believe you started in October.
Unfortunately, due to some folks scheduling, we did not start until October, which was unfortunate. I would have liked to start immediately, but it was up to the senior senator to call it to order.
Right. Which, yeah. So I guess my question to you is,
So that's just good feedback.
Yeah,
For next time.
it's hard.
It's always the same.
So yeah, the senior senator called it to order when they could. I was chosen as chair. And so that wasn't in my control.
I know, had you met in June, and been chosen,
I
we
would
could
have
gotten
loved
things
that. Yeah, I would have. And so we have, I think, 3 bills in the House that address this. And when they came and gave testimony, they said they did use the report to draft those bills. Again, we know that legislative council and other things were very, there was a lot of bills, so things that came late.
So this task force originated in this committee, and it was part of, we got, it's been such a thorny issue, and we couldn't come, and Keisha, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was our solution to a thorny issue that we couldn't land. And so, and it's still not landed with
It is
this.
not.
So what I am hoping we can do, and I've spoken to Cameron and other people know, I'm hoping we can move this forward, not necessarily putting together another task force, but
No.
really, no, I'm just saying. But tasking either a couple people who can, we just need we need a bill proposal, and we need to land in a place that addresses our concerns, landlord concerns, tenant concerns, in an equitable fashion, to move and update this issue and get this moving forward. So
Just, can I say, I mean, having been on general 15 years ago or whenever, the message I got when I got there was, it is always so difficult to open landlord tenant law. Everybody has an opinion, anything's on the table. And anytime we did want to make those changes, it wasn't a task force or a study committee. It was everyone go to the cafeteria once a week and work on this. I feel like we've lost the art of using this building post-pandemic for external, informal negotiation. But we have a lot of the stakeholders here. I just heard Angela Zajkowski's comments about immigrant housing and thought, what a sad thing that we're saying, because the federal government is coming down on immigrants, no one can house them because it feels honestly incredibly disturbing.
I didn't hear them for those.
That was an article yesterday about immigrant.
Yeah, we
housing
have a
bill.
bill in our committee, 169.
Yeah, and we incorporated some of it in the housing bill.
Correct.
Well, no, but I think maybe next year, if not this year, we'll have a lot of free time once there's only certain people in conference committees. I think we should, I'm not saying we need to pass something this year, but I think we need to better use our time on this issue because people keep wanting to talk about
I agree.
making eviction, harder when it's about non-payment of rent or something very hard for the person to control, and easier when there's behavioral issues. Right. And, and not hard, just harder with non-payment of rent, but who else gets involved and pays the rent. We have a very big crisis of access to rental housing, but it's one that has to be fair to all parties.
Exactly.
Because otherwise we'll reach gridlock. So
So that is what I'm
Let's
actually saying, which is,
guilty.
I want very much to move this forward, and I want us to, my ideal would be to have actionable legislation we can review and work on beginning in January.
The problem is there's no one else to tap than us.
Well, yeah, so I've talked with Mark Mahaly.
Okay.
And I think we are, I think there are a group of us who are ready to do that cafeteria talk.
Great.
And, so I think, taking this good work, you got teed it up nicely with all the work that you did here, and we're very grateful.
Okay.
And I think you've identified some of the, biggest challenges, which we all knew in some ways, but it's good to have it articulated.
I think so.
And our objective would be to have, bring this in the cafeteria, as it were, bring this crowd to bring people together, and really try and hammer out a proposal and legislation for next year.
Yeah, and if I may say, like, so this is a topic and policy area that I have personally spent a lot of time in over the years, and then as a legislator, it's something that I'm very invested in. So I'm happy to make myself available if it's helpful. I appreciate that. What I don't want, and I believe that you also don't want, Chair Clarkson, is for this just to be like shoved. Thank you. Like, we need to take this work and put it into action. I will say from my own personal perspective, and not to sound like a politician here, I see both sides. So that was actually difficult for me. I, absolutely see areas where we can help landlords. I think that it is a huge problem when a larger building is being affected by folks who, whether it's substance dealing and affecting the rest of the people. And then I also think it's really important that we keep people in their homes during this housing crisis. So I really came to it with that type of lens where I really support and have compassion for the people that spoke. And, I live in South Burlington and represented by these lovely senators, and we have so many renters and so many landlords in our area. And I've spent, hours meeting with them both, one-on-one. And so I'm really invested in this, but it is not as simple as you all know, as just, deciding one way or the other. I really saw areas where we could assist both landlords and tenants. But sometimes you're not going to find a compromise, as you know, and so that is our job to really make those decisions. And while unfortunately, I wish that we were in a place this fall that we could have made those decisions. It was also difficult. This was my first study committee, and I was also chairing, and I felt like, it wasn't just legislators. So it was also advocates and people in the field. So to come to a consensus was very difficult. And again, you don't always have, we've seen study committees not, have split votes and other things, but I think a little bit more time. I am proud of the work we did though, and had a very cordial committee discussions. I'm proud of the teeing up work we did, but I agree that now's the time to take action. Since I've been in this building, which is not as long as many of you, this is something that is on the forefront of people's minds, because we have a housing crisis. We need to make sure people can stay in their homes, but also in an appropriate way, because we don't want landlords to feel like they don't have the control over their rights, which is their property, their business, their lives. Not everyone has hundreds of units, and some people are my neighbor next door, right?
In fact, I think most of the rental units are owned by fairly, individual families who own a couple properties.
Yeah, I grew
majority.
up here, and I know that it is sometimes like, whether it's a senior in South Burlington who has a property in Burlington still, or one of my friends, my age group, inherited a property and now just a wonderful landlord, who has a duplex somewhere. I mean, that's stuff we want to thank housing providers. Like, landlords are not something that we should.
There are partners in this housing crisis.
Absolutely. So that's why I was really clear about that to people, that was really important to me as well. As well as though the problem is when you get evicted, you have nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So people spend months trying to find something.
I would agree. And that's why I think we really need to come to resolution on this and move this forward next year if we can. So I would say to all of my teammates here on Senate Economic Development, anybody who wants to work on this summer, I would welcome. I know Mark and I are committed to, I know you are,
I am.
and there are a couple others, and we will work to bring forward a cafeteria compromise. I'm going to use that as we have used
I like
that. Actually, we're using that to good effect right now with early childhood educators,
Oh, good.
our licensing bill. And we, Brian Collmore, channeling Jeanette White, has done exactly the same thing.
There's two very near-term reasons why I think we should be looking at this sooner than the summer and getting people together depending on where the immigrant housing bill goes. In my doom scrolling last night, I saw what seemed to be a very
You can't do that before bed.
I know I do.
That's a bad idea before bed.
I realized that. But
Got it. Sorry, we apologize. It's the landing dog.
one of the things I saw that was extremely chilling that's come up in this committee is people who have lawfully accessed social security numbers are at risk right now. There is a very credible proposal on the table. And proposal, I don't know what that means, not going through Congress, but a threat through the federal government to take away social security numbers from people who are not citizens. And these are legally accessed social security numbers so they can do financial transactions in the country.
That is so ridiculous.
That's Handmaid's Tale, just in a different form, because just taking away your access to financial tools is very frightening. If that were to come to pass in any way in the near term, that's something that states have to be able to address to give people access to identity verification and talking about social security numbers, as well as just access to financial tools. The other thing, that's like my dystopic comment.
But that is something maybe we could address in this.
I mean, I don't want to.
I don't know how. That's a big.
I don't. But this actually speaks more to why we need to talk about the social security number piece of this and how people verify their identity. It was a very chilling article, and it was very much a news article.
Yeah.
It's not like a speculative
Can a
piece.
person who was not in the United States legally get something?
Yes. And they
You could only
yeah.
get the ID number, which is available from the federal government, but all of the people who've been here illegally that I've looked at have social security numbers that are stolen or made up.
Let's look at this issue, Senator
I'm not
Rockstrom.
sure
I don't think
which problem we're
you're-
talking about.
this is a huge problem. If people who are here both legally and without documentation
Well,
lose
legally-
access to the
Legally,
social
as someone who is a legally admitted alien can in fact get a social security number.
yeah,
Or here unlawfully, I don't believe you can get a social security. This is why the social security numbers used by immigrant farm workers who are here illegally are made up or false or stolen social
that
security.
is not always true.
Every
And it would
case that
behoove
I've
us
looked
to
at,
actually
that's
talk
what I've
to
seen.
experts. We need
Okay.
experts
So
to have this conversation.
You're putting this on the table, something
Yes,
that
we
may
really
need
need
to
to be
address.
talking about this and getting expertise.
Okay.
Two, I don't think it's fair for us to do anything to limit short-term rentals until we have a better process for people who would like to do long-term rentals. We keep picking on short-term rentals, but I literally get to this point in the conversation with everyone when I say, but people are really worried about having a long-term renter that is, next to their house or on their property that they can't.
Because we have heard,
Yeah.
this committee, that one of the reasons people have moved properties to short-term rental is they're challenged
Exactly.
with exactly this problem, which is
Right.
why, in fact, I think it was in some measure
Yes.
a way that we came to a kind of a resolution of how to move this forward.
Right.
Because this is the horse before the cart. We
Exactly.
have to resolve this issue.
Exactly.
We have to resolve this issue first. Because we were on the,
For the card. Yeah. I don't know, whichever one, we have to do that.
right, this is the egg and then the baby chicken. Okay, so I agree with you that we need to do that, and let's maybe chat early next week, and we can begin some of this.
Yeah.
I don't know just to go back to your first concern on the social security piece.
Yeah.
How do we
Find that
prepare? And I heard this morning with horror that 100,000 legal people who are here legally with green cards are being identified across the country. And that's a lot of people, 100,000 people who are living here in America legally and have been maybe for decades, are being targeted from South America, mostly from South America and the islands, and being targeted for deportation. All who are here legally. So I think the question on the Social Security is, I think we need to figure out where does that fit in terms of what committee, and who should be working on it, whether that's finance and us working together. Let's think about that.
The article's titled "Pressuring Migrants to Self-Deport: White House Moves to Cancel
Yeah.
Social Security Numbers by Placing Migrants in Social Security's Death Master File," which is how you make sure dead people aren't collecting benefits. The Trump administration is seeking to cut off their access to credit cards, bank accounts, and other financial services.
I read the same article, and the question just immediately came to mind is there are maybe some migrants who are here who have social security numbers because they came in under programs
Yeah.
that admitted them as lawful,
Yes.
as lawful immigrants.
Yes.
The issue, which is the one that we see probably more than anything else in plot, is the one who is the unlawful person who cannot get a social security number because they lack to meet the requirement of being in the United States lawfully.
Okay, sure. And
Those are the ones that don't have, those are the ones that are using the false, and those are the ones who are the principal
would you
migrants who are
agree?
doing foreign labor.
Would you agree, Senator Brock, that we would want to figure out a way for them to have an identification number of some kind that helps them access financial tools?
Sure,
Because
and
they are the
way to do
backbone
that,
of our
there
industry.
is an employee, a number that can be obtained from the Social Security Administration for people in that category. The problem is that many people who are here unlawful, such as our farm workers, don't want to get that number because by not having a Social Security number, it marks them for how they're here in the first place. That's the problem.
Well, what we did with immigrant driver's licenses over a decade ago was we gave all Vermonters the option to get a different kind of ID card. And now a third of Vermonters want that ID card instead of one that allows them to get on an international flight. So we can create a tool that others are eligible for.
But what that could do, though, is that to create a situation in which you have an identity that can be verified within Vermont, but it would not necessarily be something that credit bureaus and the like who report on the credibility of financial information.
Sure, but this is a fundamental question that the economic development might need to be looking at before we adjourn. This is yet another frontier that could cause extreme pain and chaos for people living in Vermont.
I completely agree, and I would suggest that we chat about this with Kirby and Pam and
federal partner.
But if for us to move this year, we're gonna have to move. We're gonna have to.
Oh, you need to just draft language. I don't know.
So anyway,
ready, but
let us think about this, but to get back to I think what I'm hearing is
No, I find it, obviously, I'm very invested and interested.
well, it all has a connection to housing.
It really
and
does.
the eviction challenge, and it came up in the course of our discussions about the housing situation. And so I am glad. It sounds like everybody's open to a more informal but action-oriented cafeteria compromise committee that would work informally to pull this together, a proposal for us to address. David, you have some thoughts? You look like you're being very
Yeah, I totally agree. And, at the end of the day, it's our job to make those decisions.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to make, as we're doing every day, we're about to go back on the House floor for some harder decisions as well. We have to make those decisions, and I'm up for that. And not everyone will be happy, but the time is now. And again, considering what's going on, this is a huge component both of our housing crisis and making sure that people feel safe and protected, and that also landlords feel that too. That is, like I said, I'm very committed to taking their testimony. Sometimes I've noticed, I've been in this building for about a decade now. I've noticed that, sometimes the bills that are put forth are very tenant protection, but we can also use those as a vehicle after we discuss.
Absolutely.
Right, so that's what I'm kind of thinking.
We have a vehicle
We have
right now for
vehicles
next,
both
for,
in the House and Senate and, but I think it may. Yeah, so I think that'll be helpful, but, there also are some things that I'd love to chat in those things about, the rooms about how we can, help landlords as well, because,
oh, it won't succeed. It
Correct.
doesn't make it simpler, faster, fairer.
and there
so
are
I
no
think those
rules
are
for
the
them
three-
too, the
Well,
landlords.
and no, simpler, faster for them, and fairer. And we had, so thank you.
Of
And
course.
any questions for Emily before she goes off to the floor?
Well,
Yeah,
and we have announcements, I'm not in a
oh,
rush.
yeah,
Don't worry,
Log on.
we'll have a long time of.
I'm just a next steps kind of person,
Yeah.
and I just want to say for the record, I don't think it's something I feel comfortable participating in. And that was one of the issues we ran into with getting someone on the task force that you chaired is, you know, who has the time, and is, you know,
Who's a little more
really
disinterested.
able. Yeah.
But, and Richie served on it, and he's a landlord. He has quite a few.
Did he?
units.
Senator Westman and Senator Vyhovsky were the senators, and myself and Representative Joe Parsons from Newberry were the House members.
Yep. I think we're gonna need to find a senator who can.
Well, Mark and I are committed to getting this started, so I'm over there. We're gonna, we
You
will.
do the,
I'm gonna volunteer Tom.
okay.
Anyway, you can volunteer and I would look forward.
I
to
volunteer, and please know that I view myself as a partner in this and any other issues.
and your chair as well, so I.
Yeah, he really is too, and I feel like we can all have that kind of relationship, and I'm happy to talk about it and value everyone's perspectives. I think one of the most admirable things about a policymaker is when they're open and can evolve on issues and learn. And so I'm happy to learn from all of you with your expertises and come to some good policy work that can help Vermonters. That's really my goal. And I look forward to working with you all on this or other issues in the future. I think it's important when we all work together, both up and down. It makes for better policy, in my opinion,
Here.
when we have collaboration.
Thank you very much.
Let me just throw out one
Yeah.
thing here. We've talked about the citizens and.
Yep, in our housing bill.
And
So you're getting this piece in our
Yes,
housing bill.
we are walking,
immigrant
Cameron
and
is always
citizens
walking
upstairs.
us through it as we speak.
the Social Security number, this is the Social Security Administration publication. Only non-citizens authorized to work in the United States by the Department of Homeland Security can get a Social Security number, period.
Right,
Right. So that's a lot of people here except our dairy farmers.
correct. But that's a lot of people in Vermont.
That's
You'd be surprised.
a lot of people who are legally authorized, they can.
Yep.
And if they're authorized to work. Where
And why wouldn't
the
we
problem
get
we
everyone?
have in the dairy industry is people are not in here in the United States legally, nor are they authorized to work in the United States.
So what do you propose we do?
I don't propose that we attempt or think that we're going to be using social security numbers because you can't. It's unlawful.
So that's the whole point of the other bill, which is to find another way to give people the ability to verify their status as a good tenant.
Theoretically, it will be
Besides Social
good here in
Security.
Vermont, but it will not be particularly useful for credit reporting purposes.
Well, I think it will be. You mean to go back to our credit score piece for renters? I think it will be.
Well, it may be something that you could create locally here in Vermont, but to have anything that people would be able to use anyplace else.
No, they just have other ways of verifying their identity
Well,
besides Social
people,
Security
though,
number.
have been concentrating, for example, on that article that you were referring to, and the article is wrong. That's my point.
Have you read the article?
So
Yes, I read
which
the
article are we talking about? The one that you quoted earlier?
Yes, I read the
Yeah.
article.
It's a New York Times article.
So people right, we just had 2 students
Mhm.
at CVU
Right.
use their humanitarian parole status that they were granted
Yes.
under the last
Yeah,
administration.
if they were here lawfully, they
They were
could,
here lawfully.
correct.
This administration
understand.
has made them unlawful and is requiring that they leave by the end of the month.
Mhm.
There are many people who are going to be in an impossible situation and lose access, among many other things, to financial institutions. They may have money in those financial institutions. They may have existing credit information. And this is a huge problem for people who live here. So I'm asking you to have a little bit of sympathy for people whose situation changed overnight.
I'm absolutely sympathetic to people's situation change, but I'm not sympathetic to using a social security number unlawfully.
No one is asking to do that.
That's
In
my
fact,
point.
the bill asks
If
for
you have credit
alternatives.
reports and credit reporting agencies, such as the major ones, who rely on that, and who,
Point of order, are we debating H-169 right now?
No, in fact, and so I was going to say, I think when we have something to discuss, let's discuss it further, but let's wait for that.
Because
And
I'd
I'm-
love to see, I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just wondering what language we're debating.
well,
Senator Rahm has an idea for how we can further protect Vermonters who are living here legally, who may need that protection. And I think this is what it's an idea for us to discuss, but not at this very moment, because we're going to say thank you to Emily. We
Thank
appreciate it. And we're
you.
going to invite Pam in for us to discuss further mechanisms and ways to move this conversation forward.
Legal
Great.
is very much an evolving construct right now.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to use a federal extremist entity right now as a measure of what is right at this point.
correct.
And I
However,
have
that
students in
law
my
has been in
district
effect long
being
before the current
deported
administration.
And having an early graduation.
I
So
hear you.
This is a really intense moment to just be talking about who's here lawfully or not.
Right.
And those students were here lawfully, they understand.
And so they are not subject to this issue.
No, but they
That is
are about to be
true.
deported by the end of April, which is just the poll.
Somebody said for a minute.
Thank you, Cam.
Good morning.
Good morning.
For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. I am going to share my screen, so I'm just going to pull the report up just
Yeah,
so we
we'll
have it
have
in front of us, because I do want to highlight one thing. Okay. This is page 3 of the report. Just kind of bring us back to this topic. We're talking about the Landlord Tenant Law Study Committee
And how to
report
move
that
it
met
forward.
and how to
Yeah.
move it forward, correct? So,
We have options.
the report, I think, does a great job of really kind of summarizing, some of the issues around this topic. But I did just want to pull up, it has the statutory charge here. And, one thing that's not in there is, to come back with specific legislative proposals, which I think is what you all are discussing. how
What
to
we
move that
expected,
forward.
and I'm sort of surprised that we didn't have that in the charge. because
Agreed.
I assumed it was in the charge.
When I went back and looked at it, that's what I was looking for, Madam Chair, and it's looking at whether the laws require modernization. Everyone I've talked to around this topic seems to think that they should be changed or
They need
modernized
updates.
in some capacity. They may disagree as to which pieces or exactly how, but looking at the impacts of the eviction policies, whether current termination notice periods, and timelines reflect the appropriate balance, obstacles, and then, the existing basis for termination are properly utilized, including termination for criminal activity, illegal drug activity, et cetera, et cetera. So, just making sure you were aware of that. The report, I think does a really good job, especially, here in the public comment piece of really outlining, like if you wanted to read, I think, one page of the report, I think going here really helps articulate the differences of opinions on, some of the partners in the space and the concerns that, different sides of the issue have just on the topic of landlord tenant globally. So just, commenting that for you all, I think just reading this page is by itself really, really helpful. In talking with the chair, you know, I'm gonna stop sharing it. Just wanted to point those few minor things out. And talking with the chair, trying to figure out how you want to move this forward. What's the best next step?
And what are some of our options?
And what are some of your options? Yes, ma'am. So I talked with some of the team that we have at Legislative Council. Here are a few options. I'll mention some that I don't think you have any interest of moving forward, but just, you know, so you're aware. Well, one thing you can do is you can have that study committee in particular continue their work. You did this recently with the Special Oversight Committee on Workforce Expansion and Development. Madam Chair, if you remember, that committee met, did its initial charge, and then there was some additional work afterwards that you all wanted to continue. So then you brought that committee back, had them continue to do work over I believe it was last summer, and come back with some specific legislative proposals around workforce development, which you actually have as a bill.
H34.
So you could task this study committee with continuing the work. You could create an entirely different study committee if you wanted to move the work forward. Again, I don't get the impression that that's of interest to the committee, but it is an option. You could specifically task the administration with coming back with something. You could require, you know, the Department of Housing, for example, to come back with specific legislative language around this topic if you so choose. That's an option. You could create a work group in statute if you wanted to have like a kind of formal statement of this is what we want this group of people to actively work on and come back with. Obviously, the question that goes into that is whether they're going to be, you know, per diems involved, if there are members from the legislative branch, and
How does the work group
so
differ from a task?
it's more language than anything. Just calling it a work group. You know, I've seen study groups. We have, you know, language that has been passed in the past, you know, where it's a study group or it's a working group or, you know, task force. It's really more of the idea that you're trying to convey more than an actual, you know, legal distinction. So you could create a working group in statute that could come back with, you know, specific proposals. I again see that as just, you know, creating a study committee, whether you're calling it a study committee or a work group. Or Madam Chair, as you've kind of been talking with the committee this morning, you can do this informally.
Yeah.
You know, if
And that
there's
may
a
be-
commitment of individuals to continue to work on this, whether it's, you know, before the end of the session or beginning before the end of the session and continuing that work over the summer. You know, I have mentioned to you that, you know, I'm here and available to you in the group as kind of a resource.
As our counsel.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
And so, you know, whether you want to do that now during the session, whether you want to do that after the session, during the summer, you know, I could be available to help you move that forward. So it's really up to the committee, and those are some options that you have.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
And sorry, I meant to say, you know, the last piece, you know, you do have a bill in your committee that you could take off the wall and start to take testimony.
Yeah, that Tanya
That you
suggested.
walked through.
We walked her last. We didn't walk, actually, did we end up?
You didn't do
walking through?
we didn't do a full walkthrough. You did more of just an introduction from.
I think it's S91.
Yes, ma'am.
So she took many of the recommendations and fashioned them with John into a full bill or review.
Yeah, I worked on that one.
drafted
It
that.
was, but it was trying to take a lot of the different topics that are discussed in the report and kind of create some legislation around those pieces. So in theory, you have that as a starting point. You could take that off the wall and start to hear testimony and craft that language in a way that the committee was comfortable with it.
Right.
So,
Right. Any questions for Cam? Thank you. It's just, I think, such an important piece of work that we need to do. So let us think about that. And I think, yeah.
Well, I think one more question probably for Representative Krasnow, but did you hear from one or two people from each side of the stakeholder conversation or other stakeholders that were extremely compelling and had specific ideas or were worth us hearing in committee?
Yeah, I'm happy to tighten some of the witness list if that would be helpful, and send you some names of,
Right.
if that would be good, because again, since it was public comment, and
So we have all of those on your website.
right,
actually.
I solicited public comment through different ways, and so I can highlight some of the ones that I thought were compelling from both places. But yeah, I mean, here, we know, like, this is people's homes, there's nothing more important, and then it's also people's businesses and things that keep them in their home, because it may be their, right, so there are compelling, it was very compelling, and I'm happy to, narrow down some of the
So
people,
that's great. And all your witnesses are on your
yes.
webpage.
Yep,
And the report is on the webpage, which is where I found under John Gray's name from
Yeah.
their committee. And we can do that and we'll figure out how we want to take this forward. So we'll that's great. Thank you. And thank you for your work. I know it was frustrating, but I think you actually accomplished in your short time, you actually accomplished quite a bit and it really teed up the next piece of the conversation.
yeah,
So
yeah.
thank you.
My first time, and I was pushed into being chair, and they said no better time to learn.
Yes, I think that is absolutely right. It's great. And
And it's a lot of hurting people.
It was, it was.
well, and sometimes just proceeding, even if they sadly aren't able to be. I mean, all the waiting and then it's like, hurry up, wait.
Yep.
Yeah, that was, anyway, thank you very much. And I would encourage us all to take a peek at this and see what your interest level is for continuing this work. You know, if you are interested in continuing this work this summer.
Thank you so much. I'm off to the
Oh,
house
that's-
floor.
Good luck on the housing bill.
Yes, I'm very excited. I think later today we're
This
looking at it
afternoon.
some more.
Good luck getting to that.
Yeah, thank you.
No, that did I say it's the house education bill? Emily, I meant the education bill. Yeah, the other big bill that is on the desk. So the next, if you could just remind us before Scott Campbell comes, we're gonna turn to H 479 now and dig in a little deeper on some of these sections that we need, that are different from our bill, obviously. So one of them is this proposal for universal design. Would you be kind of just go through it before Scott Campbell comes, just quickly? It's a short section, and I just think one of the things we have already put in play. Anyway, why don't you just quickly go through it and then
So I drafted the language.
oh, and
but
Damien's coming.
that's what I'm saying. I drafted the language. Damien is probably better to speak to, the, universal design as a, legal concept.
Okay.
But very quickly, I mean, I could just walk
Just
through
give us a sort of brief.
the language again, so you have it. in
It's
your-
on page 13 of the H 479. And here comes Scott.
Yeah, so it begins on page 12 of the bill as passed by the House. The as passed version,
So I have 9.1.
and I'm gonna share my screen.
Scott, hi, thank you for taking a break from the floor. We will have you right away. We're just getting just a kind of anchoring overview so that we. H 479.
Yes, sir. So this is as passed by the House,
Yep,
and we're on page 12, it's section 4. And then this is creating a universal design study committee. So
Yeah.
obviously the creation of the committee, membership of the committee here on sub B. I'm just going to get to subsection C, which is really the powers and duties. So it's to study the development and implementation of a statewide universal design standards for residential buildings, including identification and analysis of the following issues. Moving to page 14. Existing federal and state laws regarding the Americans with Disabilities Act, standards and building codes, existing federal, state, and international best practices and standards addressing accessibility and adaptability characteristics of single-family and multi-unit buildings, opportunities and challenges for supporting residential building industry and meeting universal design standards, costs and benefit impacts of adopting a universal design standard, opportunities and challenges with enforcement of identified standards, and impacts to the evaluation and financing of impact buildings. So it's really taking a look at the concepts of universal design and whether or not, to what extent it would be value added to have a universal design standard in the state
Right.
for residential buildings.
Thank you for teeing us up. I'm going to now shift to Scott, who is here from before, and I know he has to get back. And I know we're going to miss you next week, and we wish you well.
Yeah, thank you.
Scott, come join us.
Okay.
Cameron, thank you for getting us launched on this.
Well, hey, everyone.
Do you know all of us?
I think so.
David Reese, Scott Campbell.
Well, I haven't actually met formally, but hello, David.
It-
Nice to meet you.
And the reason Scott is joining us is that he is the chair of a committee we've actually tasked to do some of this work. And the question I have, and I think we all have, is how do we not create another study committee when we have one that's addressing aspect very much statewide standards? So you are chair of the statewide standards
Building
for
energy.
energy, and
Right.
next step is statewide building codes. So
Okay.
Scott, introduce yourself and tell us about the committee that you're chairing.
Okay, sure. So I'm Representative Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury. My background is in building construction. I was a carpenter, contractor, designer, and energy modeler. So I've been involved in energy code stuff for a long time. I think what's going to be interesting to you is sort of the saga of energy code compliance and how we get energy code compliance in the absence of residential building codes. So we have no building code for residential construction in Vermont. So we have no infrastructure for administering, say nothing of enforcing or building codes and penalize people who don't follow building codes. We don't have contractor licensing in Vermont. So the compliance, but we do have mandatory residential building energy standards or energy code. We've had that since I think 1997. But we've never had any enforcement or penalty for not following it. So as a result, we also have commercial building energy standards, which came into effect in 2007. On the residential side, compliance has not been great. The last survey that was done several years ago showed around 54% compliance rate. On the commercial side, compliance is much better because we do have licensed professionals involved, with architects, with engineers, with people who stand to lose their license if they don't follow code. They're liable. So on the residential side, this has been a problem, and we've been trying to figure out how to increase compliance. So I think this part is what's relevant to whether we institute a residential universal design code or standards. It's the question of how do you get compliance if you do something like that, especially in the absence of building codes.
But correct us if you are chair of the committee we have tasked, the legislature is tasked to look at statewide energy codes and statewide building codes. That's the second piece of your charge.
Well, the powers and duties charge does list ascertaining whether we should adopt a residential building code. That's a little outside of we can make a recommendation. We can't do anything about adopting, although we can recommend legislation. As it happens, the Division of Fire Safety, which is in charge, has jurisdiction over all public buildings, which includes all rentals, including apartment buildings and even single family rentals. Does administer
And short-term rentals, and not lodging.
yes,
Everything.
all public buildings. And we do have, the state does have a commercial building code, which applies to buildings 4 stories and up. And since they have jurisdiction over smaller buildings,
So we do have a statewide building code for commercial buildings.
commercial building code, that's right. But the residential building code is a little different. Anyway, they are looking at adopting a residential building code, really prompted by money available through FEMA, through the BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, that is encouraging states to either adopt a residential building code or upgrade the residential building code from the point of view of resilience and sustainability in case and as we move to an era of more severe storms. So they are looking at it. I don't know how that's going to go now with federal funding being
Right.
an issue. And the administration has not been supportive of adopting any more sort of hurdles to getting building done. So they've not been supportive of authorizing a state office to administer and enforce a residential energy code. And have not somehow been very supportive of a residential building code. I think they look at it as it's adding cost, it's adding time, it's adding difficulty. But of course, there's another way of looking at it, which is what is the long-term cost or benefit of having standards? And the other, it's been interesting reviewing this with builders. So we've had this committee now, actually, we've had it for 2 years. This will be, and we're meeting again this year.
And what's the committee actually called? I've forgotten.
It's called the Building Energy Code Working Group. And there's 15 members, including 1 House member and 1 Senate member. Senator Bray was a member last year. I don't know who's going to be appointed this year. But let's see what they're going to say about that.
Sorry, I interrupted you. You were doing the long-term cost of having standards.
Yeah. Oh, so I was going to say.
I mean, it reduces costs long-term, I assume.
Sure. And in addition, I mean, one of the issues that really came up for me this past couple of years is we had participation of builders in this group. And the builders make the point, not only is having a mandatory standard, residential building energy standard, which is not enforced, make the playing field for them unequal, because some builders want to follow it and they tell their customers, this is the code, this is what we have to follow. And other builders say, well, we'll do it for less money. We don't actually have to follow that code. Nobody's enforcing it. Right. Not only is that a problem, but the other problem is without an enforcement authority and without a code, in case of building codes, builders are really the ones who are liable for what happens in the field. They make the decision about how many 2x4s is enough 2x4s, or how whether a 2x10 or a 2x12 is required for this structure. Unless they have an engineer involved, and for most residential construction, well, certainly single family construction, you don't. They're on the hook for deciding what's safe, what's applicable. That they don't even have to get inspected for egress from bedrooms, for example. There are requirements about that, but sort of requirements that aren't adopted by the mod. And so there's nobody responsible for that except the builder. The builder feels liable. We have one builder who builds prefab homes, Huntington Homes, it's the company, and he works in Massachusetts so much, as well as in Vermont. And he says it's much easier on his nerves working in Massachusetts, where there are codes, there are requirements, there is licensing for builders, because he has to follow the code, and if he follows the code, the liability goes to the homeowner, not to the builder. So lots of issues with having this sort of disconnected system that we have now.
So my question for you is, and I think our question for you is, we have this section. And we have a resistance creating more task forces, particularly when one could be re-envisioned without too much difficulty to incorporate looking at universal design. If you're also going to be looking at universal statewide residential building code, which I hope you will be, because that's again, would it not make additional sense for you to also look at this?
It could.
Instead of setting up yet another task force.
So
and that's one of my questions. Our question. That's right.
That's why I'm here. That's a good question. We have a certain amount of overlap by literature the membership proposed for for this task force, or whatever it's called. And there's some overlap with the people who are on our group. Obviously, there's a lot that isn't overlapping, like, so let's see. Oh, people from the disabilities, we actually didn't have somebody from assessors and listers, Center for Independent Living, folks like that aren't in our group, and we have more from energy folks. It used to be remote.
But you have the Division of Fire Safety.
So we have
you
a division of-
a lot of things.
A lot of things. It's possible that we could add.
Well, it's always possible to bring stakeholders, it's always possible to bring stakeholders in and ask them in.
Sure. I will say that the first year that we had this committee set up was 2023, and we had budgeted for 6 meetings. We had I think 11, which meant that those of us who wanted to pay another didn't pay. And we had a robust discussion. It was great, actually. We got a lot of information, and decided that really we should keep on going. So that's the reason we set up the committee as a working group for the following 2 years. So that's why we're going to be meeting this year. It's authorized until last year. I would say there's a lot to discuss, and my hope for what we get done this year is to come up with a really specific set of recommendations that can be turned into legislation for next year. That's more comprehensive. I did submit a bill this year, I think 181, that continues some of the work, or implement some of the work from the working group this past year.
So
But
your hope
nothing's
by
gonna
the,
happen with that, I don't think.
so your hope by the end of this summer, fall,
Right.
is that you will have recommendations for a statewide residential energy code? No,
Well, to really move the ball on compliance. One of the,
remove the ball in compliance, but not, I thought that your hope was by the end of this year to have a statewide building code recommendation, residential
well,
building code.
because Division of Fire Safety, we had the participation of the Director of Fire Safety, Michael Dorsher. It was
Yeah.
terrific. Because he's moving, he was already in process with getting a group together to talk about the logistics of adopting a building code. We decided to punt on that this past year, 14. So we wanted to let that process play out with him.
Is it playing out?
And it is playing out. I haven't talked to them in a few weeks, but they are moving forward with it. Of course, they're concerned about how they're going to fund it if FEMA money's like that, which, you know, who knows what's going to happen with that. We certainly could do something with that. We could. The question is whether how far we can go with legislation before we, you know, wind up getting vetoed, and you don't have to vote to override veto. So we don't want to put something in the legislation that is an effective poison pill, which I think a building code without the support of the Division of Fire Safety and the Public Safety Department is going to be
So how difficult would it be for you to add in that conversation this universal design idea? Because
I think we would really, I think it's another dimension. And we don't really have the expertise in this group now. We would have to add people.
but if, you know,
So
I guess I'm
concerned about that.
not wanting to duplicate effort, because if we're actually digging in and helping either with Mike and you developing a statewide building code, that should incorporate, I mean, ideally, it should incorporate some of these universal design ideas. So
Right.
how do you see us best doing that?
That's why it's a tough question. I think.
You can think about it. We don't have to solve
Yeah.
it this minute,
Yeah,
but it does strike, I think, this committee, that
Yeah.
this piece of this bill could be incorporated into work that's going on and shouldn't be done outside of the conversation of a statewide building code.
Right,
It would be,
right.
in my opinion, stupid
Right.
to create a statewide residential building code and not have these ideas incorporated into it,
Right.
because these are some great ideas, but it
So I think the real issue.
makes no sense to do them separately.
The real issue, the bottom line is we're all trying to educate the construction industry on better building standards, whether it's energy standards and universal design standards or just building code standards, building safety standards. So how do we do that?
Well,
There's some resistance
Yeah.
from the industry and from the administration and hammer approach. So how do we?
Right,
how
so
do we-
you're not doing a hammer approach,
So how do we
you're
come up with
doing
a carrot
it,
approach?
incorporating all players.
I mean, I think
Communication.
I would say from spending a lot of time with the industry on our housing bills, it's a two-way street. They're trying to educate us. I think you can appreciate on what good building standards are and what corners you can end up cutting on just good home design to just meet energy standards and how that can increase the cost. That's the conversation that our home builders and contractors have wanted to have. If that's new to you, then I worry. I just worry because that, you know, that's very compelling to me that we talk to people who are looking to give people a comfortable and sustainable home and not add thousands of dollars of new costs to construction in a housing crisis.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Google's went out.
Yes. So
Um,
sorry.
that's my thought. I'm not gonna fund any more studies, or anything that don't get us safer, more efficient, warmer, more cost-effective housing.
Yeah, well, cost effective is an interesting term because what it depends on what you're counting as costs, right? How far into the future are you looking at costs? Right. So I was whether
I think right now, particularly because we are in an affordability crisis.
sure, but we don't want to build buildings that need to be retrofitted, right?
Right.
And that's what my experience in the organization world was. Almost any building you went into could, even a new building could be, could need weatherization, could need retrofit.
Okay, but I actually think this is a really important principle to follow. And this is a conversation we've had with Jason Webster and many others. Love Jason Webster.
I love Jason also.
We cannot price people out of those homes and make them choose a lesser quality home that is not as efficient because anything we create that meets all these standards is out of the price range
Right.
of a Vermont
Understand.
middle income person.
Right.
That
Understand.
is my absolute bottom line on this.
Understand the argument.
So,
It's not just an argument. Like, would you agree that that's important?
Yes, but if an extra $10,000 in the upfront cost of a home saves $20,000 over the,
Only if we pay for it. I mean, we
Well,
can't
it's-
keep
it's-
adding costs. If it's 10,000 here, 20,000 here, we can't keep adding those costs and then expecting homeowners to be able to afford that.
if it reduces the carrying costs of the home, it adds, I don't know, let's say $50, $100 to the mortgage, but it reduces the carrying costs of that house, cash flow costs of that house.
I think
Or
what you're,
120.
I'm sorry, but what you're missing about us being the housing committee is that when you add those thousands of dollars to the upfront cost, people don't get a loan. So maybe you get $100 more on your mortgage, but that's only if you qualify for a loan. And if the price of lumber, the price of labor, and the price of energy efficient building goes up, you have fewer Vermonters who can afford to buy these efficient homes. That's the housing committee's number one priority.
I
Or
get it.
mine.
I get it.
And I think
it's
it's-
mine too.
and I
Okay.
think, quite honestly, given the representation you have on your committee, that is certainly a major concern of many of the members of your committee.
But not necessarily the people we've sent from the legislature.
So, just to go back, and I know you have to go back to the floor, we need to pivot to the landlord certificate and CAMA.
Yeah.
But if you would think about how you could incorporate universal design, we're going to be making a decision on this fairly soon.
Okay.
About what we do with this committee. and who we would need to either add to your committee, how we could all weigh in our different ways. But I think that is the question, is how can we effectively incorporate some of these great concerns, but with a
Yeah.
committee that's already working on this exact issue.
Yes. So I will say, the one thing we have done sort of in this effort to increase compliance is we've with the cooperation and really impetus of the Office of Professional Regulation was to create a mandatory builder registration process. It's not licensing in that there's no credential, there's no competency test, none of that. It's just registration. But there is that mandatory. There is an option for voluntary certifications.
Right.
And that was the pathway that we were trying to
And we've
create.
seen a growth in that.
Well, it's somewhat. It's still in the early stages. Which it's not going as fast as I would like it to go. The OPR is they're already losing money in the professional regulation division of the Secretary of State's office. So they don't have the money to upgrade the website, which is really the critical piece, because the website needs to be consumer friendly. It's going to be useful.
Are you telling us that is not functional, right?
It's sort of functional, but it's not as functional as it should be. It's not like you go onto any other website and you can filter by. By say what areas does this builder serve, what specialties does this builder have, what certifications does this builder have. We don't, it doesn't sort of filter by like that. Yes, you can download a spreadsheet and filter the spreadsheet if you're not savvy with computers. So that's a problem.
So we would appreciate it if you would think about how to incorporate
Okay.
this universal design element into your work, or we're going to have to figure out what to do with it. As you've heard, we not only are advocating strongly for affordable housing, we're also advocating for not any more task forces.
Right.
So
Right.
if you can do this with the group that you have, and or if we need to add one or two people,
Okay.
that would be great.
I will think about it. I'll get something back to you as quickly as I can.
Yeah,
I'm pretty stuck this next week.
I know. So we wish you well this
Can I ask,
Yeah.
is reducing cost and increasing affordability in the charge of this group?
No, but we could add it.
I'm gonna add.
It's, again, it's a question of whether we're looking strictly at upfront costs
Yeah.
or at long-term.
And it sounds
When
like
I-
you've looked at that. I mean,
Yeah.
you've been looking at that, and I think
I
if
mean,
you
that's
can,
something that I did when I was doing
Right.
energy modeling all the time, right?
But we can't afford to push people away from being able to get financing for their upfront costs.
So there's a way of reducing upfront costs, which is to reduce the footprint, the square footage of the building,
Amazing.
right?
Yes.
And it's building a better building that's
and
less
more
expensive.
definitely. So we're all over that.
So
We're,
let's do building a better, denser, smaller building
Right.
and add that to your charge.
so if you would think.
We're there.
I think that would be welcome. So we might be considering adding to your charge, and if you were willing to continue and maybe begin the looking at this piece.
Okay, I will try to get some cheese to do okay.
That was great.
Possibly Wednesday, I'm not
I
sure.
know you have a tough week coming up, so we wish you well,
Yeah.
and we hope all goes well.
Thank you.
And
Actually, tough, the rest of the session, that's, I'm not keeping it a secret, so I won't keep it a secret from you either. Starting chemo treatment next week.
I know.
I've never had this before. I don't know what it's like. People say it can be awful. And I'm really not going to be in the building, as far as I know, at least not regularly, for the rest of the session, so.
so we wish you well.
Well, then I won't mess with your bill too much.
But we will be in touch, and we'll be able to be in touch. So.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your leadership on this committee. And we may have Mike in too at some point to get an update on where he is with his,
Hey, that would be a good idea.
the statewide, we're talking about the statewide building code name. So.
Yeah. Sure. And if you want to hear more about energy code and the various efforts that we've made at increasing compliance, Richard Fazy is as he's the one person that knows more about this than anybody probably.
Yeah.
So
Not necessarily how to reduce cost.
Okay,
What did you say?
But it's great. I love him, not necessarily how to reduce costs. I am,
Oh, I will tell you one thing though.
yes,
And that is, so I was the weatherization director from 1991 to 2002 in Burlington. And pretty quickly in my tenure there, they've been here. We figured out that, we're not in the energy business so much as we're trying to make buildings safer,
mhm,
healthier, more comfortable, more durable.
mhm,
And if we did all that right, we were more efficient.
that's right. And maybe you can help me work with historic preservation
Oh, my God.
to do that as well.
we're not opening that can of worms right now. So, and actually,
It's all
it's pretty good.
related. And you know what? I'm inspired to ask to serve on this committee
Fantastic.
because we need a housing person on the committee.
That would be
So
fantastic.
you've heard it here.
And we thank you in advance. And good luck. But personally, we wish you well next week,
Yes,
and we hope all goes well.
Okay.
You are a treasured member of this General Assembly, and we really hope that it all comes out well. And thank you, and we'll be in touch next week, because our committee would love to hear what you have to say about
Yes,
this.
I certainly.
Right, and you now have a volunteer,
Yeah.
you may join it, and but we'll have
That
to
you
add
don't
that.
want. Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, thank you so much,
Okay.
Scott. Good luck on the housing. I'm not the education bill. Good luck on the education bill.
Oh, yeah, that one, yeah. All right.
Great,
Okay,
thank
bye.
you. So, we are gonna pivot from universal statewide building residential building codes to our landlord certificate HAMA work. And to tee that up, I'm gonna ask our legislative council just to review the sections where it is in the bill. And, Cameron, if you'd be kind enough to come, and then Nate, you're gonna be on that, and Jill, it's great, and Jill, and oh my God, we've got a whole fabulous group in tax. So we have, so we're going to dig into these sections 5 and 17 through 18. And this is an issue that those of us who've served on this committee, for many years have been wanting to address. And this is what we did in lieu of a rental registry last year, and we're moving this forward in this bill even further. So, Pam, if you could just give us an overview of what we are doing here, and then we're going to dive into the specifics. And yeah, and then when we have actually right now, while you're pulling up that. There are a lot of new people in the room who we haven't seen. I don't know if is this Rebecca? Is this your first time this year?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have some new members. So why don't we just quickly introduce ourselves?
I'm Tom Chittenden, I represent the Southeast Quadrant of Chittenden County.
Keisha Ron Hinsdale, same district.
It's Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
Randy Brock, Franklin County, and Norman Randall County.
Good morning, Dave Weeks, representing Baldwin County.
Great. So we are going. Are you not able to? pull up?
Nope, coming right back. I grabbed the wrong piece of paper.
No, wow. So thank you all for being here today. So while Cam's getting the right people, right, just run around so we know who's here.
Jake Feldman, Tax Department.
Tim Terway from Mont Center for Geographic Information.
Okay.
Jill Remick, Department of Taxes,
Property value and review.
Property Valuation Review.
And senior, we know,
Michael Harrington, Chamber of Commerce.
right? And
Yeah,
that we
and then-
know, and Nate we know, and
Rebecca Samroth, Department of Taxes, Deputy Commissioner.
okay, we all set, we're all introduced, and so we're looking at sections 5, 17, and 18, as I recall.
For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. What I have up on the screen is H 479 as it passed the House. So I just have the as passed House version up. This is on page 16, section 5. As you can see, for the reader assistance heading, we're talking about tax department and housing data access. This is amending 32 VSA section 5404. This is information that municipalities are required to provide to the tax department, as you can see, for education property grand list purposes. And we're adding that municipalities will provide an extract of the assessor database, also referred to as a computer assisted mass appraisal system or computer assisted mass appraisal database. It's information that municipalities gather and collect, and they're going to be providing this extract of this to the tax department. As far as what all is in this database or these database sets and what it will be used for, you have the individuals in the room to ask.
Right.
So
So an
that's
extract, which means the subsection of that huge grant.
it'll just be the database that's in their system and the information in that database. They will be capturing an extract of that and passing it on to the tax department,
So what do you mean by capturing an extract? What is the extract?
making a copy of the data.
So it's just
database
simply providing the whole thing.
of the information that's in there. Yes, ma'am.
Right. Okay. So I don't know why we call it an extract. We just start sending it all over to you.
They're extracting the information and giving it to it.
That's
Yes.
the method. Okay. That's the method. Got
Okay.
it. Okay.
That is section 5.
That's the beginning of
That is
section
the
four.
only, that's the only change there.
And then we go to
Going
sections 17 and 18, which
This is going to be on page 27. This is related to the landlord certificate. So as you can see here on the top of page 27, section 17, you all made changes to the landlord certificate last year in Act 181. This section is repealing what you changed last year and would then instead insert what is in section 18. So this is the landlord certificate information that is provided each year to the Department of Taxes by landlords. And the changes here are primarily in, this is where I had to grab a piece of paper because I have Act 181 here. So we can kind of do a little compare of what you passed last year versus the changes here. Last year you had, right now, it's the address and property, the address and any property tax parcel identification number of the homestead that is in current statute. And that is being changed under this language, under the House, to remove any property tax parcel identification number. So it would just be the address and so again, change from what you passed last year. I guess I should clarify a few things real quick. You made the changes last year in Act 181. Those changes are going into effect July 1 of this year. So they haven't actually gone into effect yet. And so we're repealing what passed last year, inserting this change, which would then go into effect July 1 of this year. Okay. So the change here is what's different than what you passed last year is this would remove the requirement to provide the property tax parcel identification number and instead require the school property account number of the rental property. As far as what the differences are of those two things,
we're going to find out.
exactly. I am the person to speak to that, just letting you all know that is a change in what was passed. The other pieces here are changing from rental unit to rental property. Again, as far as why there's a request to make that change, I'll defer to others. The other things are primarily deletions. So in the language that you passed last year, so this is what I'm sharing my screen, Act 181, 2024, you included the location of the rental unit. You included the number of rental units in the building that's being changed to on the property.
Right.
But what's being proposed is to remove providing the location of the rental unit, to remove providing the gross monthly rent per unit, and to remove the requirement to provide the year in which the rental unit was built. So the changes that the House is proposing is primarily removing information that you all were going to require past last year.
Right.
And again, primarily those three things, the location, the gross monthly rent, and the year in which the rental unit was built. And then there are changes to instead of, the rental unit, it's on the property. And the number of rental units on the property instead of in the building. So you can see that here. the pieces have been deleted, and then you have types of units on the property, et cetera.
And then some of them have been reincorporated in the additions. Like the school property account number is now incorporated into number 2.
That is, my understanding is that was not in your bill last year.
It was, and it's been struck. It's number 6 under the struck languages.
Chair, I'm not following you, but
That's okay. I'm on page 32 of the bill as passed out the committee. Anyway,
yes.
we'll
So that is again, just making sure you're aware that you passed changes to the landlord certificate last year. You
Yeah.
are now repealing that. If this were to pass, the House is proposing to repeal what you had done last year, insert it with this substitute,
Great,
which primarily just removes some information of what you passed last year.
but adds other pieces.
And adds a few other
Yeah.
things. Again, it makes this change. Yes, it wouldn't require the property tax parcel identification number. Instead, it would require the school property account number, et cetera.
Great.
And then this information here on page 28, as we get to subsection F, this is the same as what you passed last year. So currently, on or before October 31st, the department has to prepare and make available to members of the public upon request a database in the form of a sort of spreadsheet that contains this information. That requirement is being removed. This was passed last year in Act 181, so this is similar. Instead of requiring that, it's annually on or before December, the department has to submit a report of the aggregate data collected to these committees, House Committee on General and this committee. And that was a change that you made last year, and that remains the same. And that's the end of that section.
Great. Thank you.
So you have the CAMA piece, municipal information being required to be provided to the tax department, and then you have these changes to the landlord certificate.
Okay. Great. So to explain why we've made these changes to make this landlord certificate and the information incorporated more robust and more useful, I think, as a reference document. I think we are starting with Nate.
I'm here for Cam. I would defer to the tax department on
Okay.
the certificate.
Okay, great. So Jill, should we start with you? That'd be great.
Depends. Jill Remick, property valuation group. It's about the landlord certificate. That is all Rebecca and Jake, if you don't mind. Sorry. not to-
Okay, I'm gonna rephrase. I'd like to start, I'd like to take it from where we, from the tee up to the particular.
I can just join you in the little chair.
Rebecca, why don't you just pull up the second chair and do it together? I know. Because as for new committee members, we were taking, in case you may want to chime in here, because what we were doing was taking at the recommendation of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, taking the landlord certificate, which already exists, and helping make it a little more robust, so that it was a little more useful for,
You mean this year or last year?
no, what our whole objective here with the landlord certificate and making it more robust was to help provide more information for,
It's a grand bargain,
it was a grand bar.
between making it confidential, so we would keep participation at its extreme all-time high of above 90%, because
Right.
it used to be very underutilized, and get better and
Data.
more useful data to aggregate, and use that to better understand the cost of rental housing, and do that by area.
And location. Right. So welcome, introduce yourselves and
Thank you. Glad to be here. Jake Feldman, Tax Department.
Yeah, Rebecca Samrock, Deputy Commissioner, Tax Department.
And yeah, thanks for having us in. We do have a couple short slides under, I think it's under Rebecca's name on the
yes,
website.
we have them here.
Yeah, and a little bit of background. the tax department's been a couple of years on organizing a reform to the rent rebate. It was based on studies that had been done by housing of ways to improve. It incorporated those suggestions and it achieved a broad swath of policy goals that people had been asking for. I could start to name them. I'm not sure I'm gonna get them all, but I'll name some of them. We made it so that renters sharing a unit could individually file for a credit.
Oh, I thought we had a celebrity thing with us, Senator Joe H. But he had to go.
you're talking about me?
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay, so big changes in 2021. We made it so that renters who are sharing a unit could individually file for a credit. That didn't exist before. Only one renter used to be able to do that.
Right.
And that meant that they had to share social security numbers and sensitive income data.
And I pleaded with my roommates that year and their parents to get me that information.
Right. So we have personal experience.
And I
with
was
that.
a student.
Not ideal. So now each renter individually can claim renter rebate.
And I don't think I'm going to be able to get to all the improvements, but here's another one. We made it so that renters do not have to reach out to their landlords for certificates. That's kind of magical.
That's great because they.
Very magical. I like that you said magical. We're talking about a magical tax.
I like the tax
Well, the
department saying
administrative-
magical. This is good. But also this was a problem for new members. This was a problem. Renters were not always able to get it. Landlords were always quick in getting it to them or didn't get it to them.
You should relabel this as magical changes.
Yes.
Yeah, that would have been better than important.
Magical.
That's right.
We like magical thinking of the tax department.
All right, here's another one. There used to be these income thresholds that were fixed and that were the same statewide. We adjusted it based on region because rental costs are different depending where you are in the state. And we adjusted it based on family size, tied to HUD values. Here's another one. If you were sharing a unit with some roommates who were not really connected to you, but you did share an apartment, your overall income could have set you over the thresholds, you'd get nothing. We made it so that each person is evaluated individually. I could go on and on, but it was pretty massive. And
this went into effect in July?
2021.
Oh, in 21.
Yep. So in 2018, so this is the old renter rebate. 25% of the claims were issued within 60 days. This past year, 96% of the renter credit claims were issued within 60 days.
Congratulations.
So this is pretty magical. But the purpose of the landlord certificate is to collect the data needed for back-end verification of renter credit claims. We are talking about people. We need to get money to people. We're not collecting data about units. So the way the form is set up, it collects a little bit of information about the property, and then it collects just the core information we need about the people who rent at that property, because we need to verify things. And we need to verify them quickly and easily so we can get them their credit quickly. The 2021 reform made the landlord certificate much easier, but we still do deny too many credits each year because there's no certificate. If adding unrelated survey fields to the form would have made the issue worse. It would have made more work for the department, and it would have put the credits of many low-income renters at risk. So the language last year, which sort of pivoted to like a unit-based collection idea, would have made things quite challenging.
So your suggestions for improving it
are in the bill.
All of our work is subject to improvement.
Okay.
Or
Well,
lots of it anyway.
yes. And I want to make clear that the language looks different, but the only field that is not being collected that you were looking for was gross monthly rent paid per unit. That's the only one that is not on there. Everything else is still on there. Yeah. And then, the year the property was built is going to come through CAMA data, but everything else is still there. So we just changed the language to say, here's what we're going to collect for the property. And then, that data will be available to those who need it. And then, we're going to continue to collect data about each renter below, which is what we need to administer this program.
Because tax is individual.
Right, they're individual tax filings. You got it. So, so that's what Section 18 does. Respectfully, we ask that that the committee continues to include Section 17 and Section 18 language in your housing bill, and that will help us efficiently administer the program for low-income renters. And we did develop that language in partnership with VHFA, who's, I think, conducting the housing needs assessment and was looking for this data originally. So the new language is trying to capture what they need.
Right. And Rebecca?
I'm here in case anyone had a really easy question about it. And mostly because I wanted to spend some time with this committee for the first time.
Well, it's great. It's great to have you.
I could add some narrative fluff about, why we made these changes, but I can wait to see if there's any follow-up questions in the interest of everyone's time.
So Jake, this has been your baby. You have been working on this this is your construct.
So it goes back to like 2018 when Doug Farnham and I started working on it.
So you work in the property value and review.
I work in the office of the commissioner, but I do property.
But Doug was, as people may remember, well, some of us worked with him a lot on when he in his capacity. PBR.
That might have been when he was deputy.
Yeah, when he was
And this renter credit program is actually administered through our taxpayer services division, much like the income tax or others. And there's a lot of, this is certainly Jake's baby, but there's a lot of parents of this program among our frontline staff too, who work, very tirelessly to get these credits out. Because this is, of our three big benefit programs, this is the one that really targets the lowest income band and, feels like really, really important and on mission for folks.
Right. And yet so many were getting the benefit that was available to them.
Right.
I mean, really, if you look at that number, 25% versus 96%, that is just
it's huge. Just something we're so proud of.
Yeah,
and
you
there's
should be proud of it. That's
still
really
room for improvement. And actually, VHFA have been great partners in thinking about kind of future state of improving our outreach to landlords to make sure we can get those compliance numbers up even more. Because now that these forms are, comparatively effortless to fill out, really makes a huge difference to have them on file with the department.
And when you say that Jake, that each renter can now access the information without the landlord, where do they go? Do they just go to tax? Or you have that on the website? How do they access that?
So they submit their renter credit claim and they never talk to their landlord, but they do write the SPAN on their form, which is the school property account number.
Right. And they get the SPAN from their contract with the landlord. How do they get the SPAN?
They can ask their landlord, but we actually, with VCGI, we developed a way for them to look it up on our website.
So you can do that, taking away a research step for the renter.
Yeah. So more magic there. And then on the back end, the landlord is submitting their certificate and it has the SPAN on it. So we can match up on the back end, saving everybody a lot of work.
That's right, Thomas.
Out of curiosity, can you describe why you need the SPAN versus the tax parcel identification number?
The SPAN is a unique property identifier. Parcel IDs are town level, and they have very varying formats, and I'm not sure if they're unique.
Right. So they're more useful for you statewide.
SPANs are definitely. Yep.
Okay. Thanks. So yes, that's one of the things we're trying to do is help you make it simpler. Great. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you for your work on this. This is
our pleasure. Thank you for helping me.
Yeah. Well, that took a lot of legislative involvement too to get that reform happening. So we're really grateful for it.
And our compliance, how if we noted additional compliance, I mean, this is a question for Maura, but and Jill, do we have a higher compliance with landlords filing their landlord certificates?
We're certainly getting a lot more of them. And part of the program change was that now every landlord unit, if you just have one unit, is required to submit them. The thing is, like with this program, because it targets such low income renters, there are a lot of, kind of unknowns.
Right. And very informal.
If we don't have any, rent, landlords of like higher end apartments who probably don't have renters in that income band may not be filing a landlord certificate, and we wouldn't know because we don't have the.
So, but we
renter
want
credit
them to be
claims.
filing it as well. For us to have robust rental information, we want all landlords to be filing their.
I think it depends on, how, your intended use of a landlord certificate. For us, as long as there is a landlord certificate on file for every renter who claims a claim, then that is our goal, and 100% compliance for all landlords would make that happen, 100%.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if there's like, a luxury apartment building that, it's pretty, unlikely that there's going to be any renter credit claims from there. It's not our top priority to hunt down that landlord and make sure he's filing.
So I guess I just asked Chad, who's here.
More, I believe, is on as well.
Oh, is more on as well?
Oh, just
I thought, oh,
now, just, yes.
it's amazing how, that piece of information you'd never have had 21 years ago.
I don't think I would know. Yes.
She's right there. So Maura, I guess I'd just like to ask, who does the outreach? Maura, welcome. It's good to have you.
Hi, thank you. Right on cue, right?
Yeah, we're right on cue. Well, it just, as we look at trying to get all landlords to come into compliance on filing their landlord certificate, what outreach and who's been doing the outreach to accomplish these amazing numbers? This incredible improvement in terms of the renter credit claims that were issued as a result of this work. Who's doing that outreach to the landlords to help encourage them?
And Chair Clarkson, if you don't mind me chiming in, I just want to say that we had a really great conversation with Leslie in Maura's shop about ideas for moving forward. So right now, the tax department does outreach to landlords, and I'm not sure if BHFA is doing anything independently, but we're seeing a great opportunity for collaboration moving forward. Right, so it might not be on your radar yet, Maura. No, I'm talking to you back here, but.
Hi, I'm Maura Collins. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. And yes, I'm well aware, have been staying apprised of all the work that in my shop. I know that I'm the one who speaks to this committee, but as you all know, there's 45 smarter people in my office than me, and they're the ones doing the work. And in this case, it's really led by Leslie Black Plumeau and assisted with Chad Simmons, who's in the room. So I just want to point out, make sure everyone understands what the stat is. And if I have it wrong, please correct me. But it's not saying, and I misunderstood this last year, that it's not saying that 25% of landlords or rental units were covered by the certificate and now 96% of units are covered. It's saying that of the people who apply, 25% used to get their check in 90 days, and now 96% get their check in 90 days. So clearly people are doing a much better job of filling out the form. It's complete. Therefore, they're getting their money faster. That's the point. But we still don't know what percentage of the 80,000 rental units in the state are filling out the form and doing it versus not. Right now, because when we look at the data of the forms that have been received by the tax department, there's just a lot of duplications. There's a lot of, it looks like there's a lot more units covered than really are. And so it would take a lot of scrubbing to find out exactly how many of the 80,000 apartments are included in that.
And that was my question, which is why I was pivoting to Chad, because we didn't know you were here. But how do we then, moving beyond the rent rebate, how do we move to further compliance with all the landlord certificates so we can actually get the data we need on renters in Vermont, all renters in Vermont?
It's a great question. So as they said, the tax department does this outreach, and VHFA definitely puts out information. We have information about 15,000 of the 80,000 apartments in the state. There's 15,000 apartments that have been subsidized with some kind of government funding. So we have a database of those, and definitely push the word out that way. After that, we'd be talking with Angela Zykowski at the Landlords Association. And I mean, I don't know. I know that as Rebecca said, that like Leslie and others are trying to figure out how we can increase the compliance of the 15,000 subsidized apartments and how we make sure that they're all filling it out, because right now I don't think they all are. But I don't know, it's 80 minus 15, we're talking 65,000 apartments that don't have government subsidy. They're harder to reach. And so that outreach, you know, we could keep brainstorming about ways to get to them, but it's probably through the Landlords Association and other public service announcements.
Okay, and we don't need to charge anybody with doing that continued work. That work is ongoing, yes? Or do we need to further underscore this in a ask?
I would be hesitant to make an ask until I had my arms wrapped around how many of the 80,000 apartments are covered right now. Because I wouldn't know how to scale that ask. Maybe there's 50,000 apartments covered in the database. Maybe there's 70,000, maybe there's 20,000. I don't have clarity on that. And I don't know if tax department does, because I know you have the database, but I know that when we've looked at the actual data in the database, we notice a lot of duplication. And so then we just say like, wow, that's a big project to clean this up. And I don't know if any of us have had that project come to the top of our list. I don't want to, I do have some testimony though, because right now I'm noticing I'm coming across kind of negative, and I am in support of these legislative changes. So at some point I would love to pivot to speak in support of this work that was done in partnership between the tax department and us.
And with our encouragement. So I mean, this was a piece of our work, trying to get more data on renters and location. So maybe now would be, I know you were going to go last, but actually because why are we doing this? You are the big picture of why are we doing this? Maybe let's pivot to your testimony right now, and then we'll go to Jill and our VCGI person.
Well, mine's going to be, I thought I was going last, so I was going to be very brief and just remind the committee, which I know you already did, but where this has come from is that the legislature has long had two different goals it's trying to accomplish in one way. And anyone who studies policy knows that that always gets muddy. So the two different things that I've heard the legislature want is data. And people talk about the housing needs assessment, and they talk about wanting to understand where the rental units are, how much they're renting for, trends in rental housing. And it's a data collection goal that the legislature is.
So Maura, we're having a little challenge with your feed.
Okay.
Your internet feed is like every other word.
Okay. Let me also turn off my heat pump, and maybe that is making audio sounds.
We don't want to have you freeze though.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, so take it from the two goals we had.
There are two public policy goals that I've heard the legislature looking for. One is around housing data, where we can find out how many apartments are there, where are they, how much do they rent for, what's the quality of them, and any trends in understanding the data around the rental housing market. Right. When I say that there's 80,000 apartments in the state, I'm using a census number, but that doesn't mean that I could drive you to each of them and know where they are and what the situation is.
Right.
The second goal that many in the legislature have had over the years came from a rental housing safety habitability study that happened many years ago. And the goal was to not only know where the rental apartments are, but to have a way of inspecting them, and through a fee-based system, self-funding that inspection program so that complaints could be lodged if quality issues were at play. And that was actually a couple different summer study committees that led to recommendations that were never fully implemented. And so the changes that were passed this committee and originated in this committee last year were really dealing with the data issues and less with the setting up an inspection program and a rental housing registry. It was really just trying to get our arms around the data. And in doing so, VHFA did recommend that we use the landlord certificate because it was an existing tool. And, you know, we thought that was a good idea. And then the tax department rightfully raised their concerns about how compliance may decrease by using this for a data collection tool. And we at VHFA do agree that we would not want renters to lose out on the financial benefit of the rebate just because some data nerds wanted to understand more about the housing market. So that's why we are in support of these changes. The CAMA data that is in that first section that Cam walked through, that is the data coming from towns that we are cautiously optimistic about. It looks like a great data set that we can't wait to see what comes in, but we haven't seen it yet. You know, that hasn't been flowing. So I'm very optimistic about it, and I don't know what we'll be able to glean from that information until we see it. But that's a step in the right direction.
And the objective, as far as I understand it, is to marry these two data sets so that we have a robust understanding of who, what, where, how much.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the other changes make sense, again, in support of the tax department to so that we don't compromise compliance and the goal of the rebate program. And so taking out the rent amount and the year built makes sense in that way. I mean, I remember flagging last year that I thought year built was going to be complicated because I know how often buildings get rehabbed, and so when a building becomes housing is different than the year the building may have been built, and then and the like. But I also still want to flag that I still think that the ADA data point, which is still in there and no one has asked for it to be removed, I think that's going to be very complicated to answer because I think that accessibility is defined in many ways and most people don't understand ADA.
Sorry, which one is more of the new ones under in section 18 of the new pieces? Which one do you think is going to be tough?
Well, last year you added ADA accessibility, and
Yeah.
I just I'm not going to have a lot of high quality. I'm not going to think that data is going to be high quality because I don't trust that people know what ADA accessibility really is.
Right. That was added this year.
It was added last year. Right?
Was it?
It's
Why it's not, then it's not crossed out?
it's still included.
Oh, okay.
No one's proposed crossing it out, and I just have to say,
yeah.
you can leave it in, but I'm not gonna,
You don't have high hopes for it.
I don't, but it's fine. If it doesn't lower compliance, then might as well leave it, but we could go around this table right now and ask people what they think ADA accessibility means, and we're all going to have a different definition. You know, is it 34 or 36-inch doorways? Is it, you know, there's a lot of
Right.
rules
And
to that people don't understand.
Yeah, and I'll fill you in on the conversation we just had about universal design and adding that to our statewide building standards discussion that's in the task force that's ongoing, that Scott Campbell is one of the chairs of.
Yes, I was listening to some of that.
Oh, you were? Okay, good. Great. So thank you. Chad, anything else you want to add? No?
Maura said it all.
Okay, Maura, well, great. Anything else from tax before we shift to the other part of tax?
I'm good.
Okay, any questions, committee? Thank you. Nate?
No questions.
Okay. Jill and
Do you want Nate to go first?
Yeah, so I can table set how this is gonna be helpful.
Great, that would be
Okay.
terrific. And
And
it's, and then we're going to hear from Jill and, yeah, okay, great. Perfect. Look, Joe brought you a chair, so you got a chair. Right. Jake, right over there. Okay, Nick, welcome. Introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Nate Formulari. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Housing and Community Development. And I'm just gonna kind of table set this CAMA data piece of this, and then the experts can talk to you about the specifics of how the mechanics of how it all works. Let me just, so I have just real quick slides here.
Thank you. And we have them here.
Yes, and you have them. So I thought this would be a good moment to update on some of the work we've been doing around that we've been asked and required to do through Act 47 and Act 181 when it comes to tracking housing development around the state. So those laws both task DHCD and the RPCs, Regional Planning Commissions, to develop housing targets for the state, both statewide and regional, for 2030 and 2050. We actually contracted with VHFA and their analysts to develop those targets, which I'm just flashing up here. Perhaps you've seen them, perhaps you haven't, but these targets are broken out by Regional Planning Committee region. Act 181 asked DHCD to then track the state's progress towards those housing targets and report out annually on how we're doing. That we had no mechanism to do that we didn't have a tool that could handle that. So this is where the idea of the dashboard started. Traditionally, we've followed housing construction starts by looking at building permits through the US Census, but that doesn't break down regionally, and we needed a better number to be able to track. So we created this new tool from scratch and entered the brilliant minds at VCGI, who really led the work in developing this dashboard, which these are screenshots. Anytime I try to do something live, it always fails when I'm sharing the screen.
But before you leave, just to reinforce our priorities and our challenge are the numbers right here. And what we want to know is how we're doing. And here are these huge challenges and seriously magical, to go back to magical, our magical hope. And what we also need to be tracking is how we're doing on a yearly basis. And we don't, we still have this aspirational goal, and sadly, so many pieces of the market and our own work have thwarted us from accomplishing these, but so important for us to keep these goals in mind every day. Sorry, Thomas.
This is great. I really appreciate this type of level of metric. Can't improve what you don't measure. And this is really important, critical work. So I'm really glad to see it all as just something that might be helpful. Competition also brings out the best in us. So if we could break these regions out by Senate district, I'd just love that.
Well,
now there is an interesting idea.
We'll get a pool going, and so I'll actually address that now. I was going to mention it later, but the next step in these targets, and again, part of Act 181, is the RPCs are now developing their future land use maps. Yeah. And as part of that process, they're taking these targets and breaking them down to the municipal level. So that's to come. And when that happens, we will get that into the dashboard. Those numbers are just being developed and out for public comment.
The RPC is actually along with the towns, because this planning work is being done with them.
Correct. When they
are developing targets per town.
Per town.
Wow, how fabulous that. David.
And this is all new construction, not renovation.
It's yes, generally new construction.
Is it
on the dashboard? But there are again, I guess I would call this dashboard. I would call this like a beta version of this. Okay. We're still perfecting it. And that's part of the reason why we need this CAMA data, because we think it's going to help perfect it. But we also are planning in the future, let's build in the VHIP units and the affordable housing units that are being developed.
I thought it was new units online. That's what we need, is new housing units online. It doesn't necessarily need to be new. It just needs to be, it could be renovated, it could be new.
Back on the market and available as a unit. That's what the 41,000 came from. Mara was always very clear.
Yes, and that's what this target includes. Absolutely.
A created ADU would add to this.
Correct.
Yeah, or a VHIP.
Yes.
Correct.
If it was not being used before.
But isn't.
So let's just
and home share is here today, and so that is also Yeah, so we need to be able to include it all.
Okay, so this dashboard here is aiming to include all of that stuff.
Right.
But we did not have this before, so we had to create something. We had to create a starting point.
Right.
So these dots you see on the map are actually mostly E911 hookups. So when 911 gets a hookup, there's two categories: a development site and then a finished build. So that's what these dots are tracking, is when 911 has a new site. And
So we still can't use the grand list?
so that's what we want to talk about with Cam. I was table setting. I'm sorry.
You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job.
Yeah. I'll hurry up with my table setting.
Don't even. You're doing a great job.
Can I say one more?
Yes.
I think it's going to be, I think we have a lot of constituents that we've tried to educate that it isn't just units built. And that's what
Right.
it says everywhere. So
Units online or
Like,
something. It needs to
that's,
be. Yeah.
we don't know a great word, but maybe
Fair.
Maura can come up with one, but we've really been trying to educate. We have very involved constituents in South Burlington, for example, who we keep trying to say that we have a lot of poor quality housing that is not up to code, and this helps bring more units back.
So maybe
Absolutely.
online or something, Dave.
And to Nate's point, it's accurate, the title's accurate right now, units built.
So what we have,
It's a new E911 hookup. It's only a unit that gets built newly.
Or renovated newly that was uninhabited.
that did not have a hookup before. I don't work at E911, so I don't want to say anything wrong about how they're operating. I will say we are working with them, and they have been great in that.
So maybe Nate, actually, you could just ask Barbara that question,
Sure.
which is it, I mean, for example, a VHIP unit that had been offline altogether and had nobody living in it would not probably currently have an E911, but that I think goes to Keisha's question, which is, does this capture?
I can follow
Yeah,
up
that would be great.
with
Barbara, that would be great.
Whatever we say, we need a different word.
fair.
Keep going.
Fair and understood.
Yeah.
So E911 has actually agreed to add some fields. So when they get, because right now it's just a dot, and we don't know what that dot means in terms of, is it a duplex? Is it 30 units? It's just a dot that shows up. So they have, they are going to be building out some of their forms to collect more, like how many units each hookup relates to. So that's to come. Again, we put beta right on this thing because it's kind of always evolving. Or we want it to evolve over time to get more accurate, but we had to start somewhere. Let's see. So I guess okay. This gets me to the CAMA part of this.
Yes.
There are multiple uses for how that could be used. One is we are hoping that we can add some fields to that data as well. So as the RPCs, we don't want to have to go town by town, clerk by clerk, and ask for all the buildings that are being built. We want to automate it. So by getting access to this data and adding fields like year built, how many units, we're going to get a better picture of units being built, where and when they're being built. So that's the reason why DHCD is interested in this section of the bill, and why we included it in the governor's housing bill as well. And that's my piece.
We're bringing you around slowly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're happy with the language that came from the House, and we should move forward.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you. That's a good table setting.
I just want a whole separate presentation, like zooming in on the map, and this is my favorite conversation.
So the last.
How
page,
close
haven't
did you
done.
get?
Oh, I wanted to feature your district, Senator.
Yay!
So
are you featuring Windsor County? This is wonderful.
Essex and Williston are eating our lunch.
Yeah.
Go to the competitive street.
Yes, yeah, I'm trying to get it going here. Let's get some bets going. So I just wanted to show that this dashboard.
No, just getting some housing.
Okay. No bet. I'm sorry.
You circulate, you can look at it.
Yeah, it's very cool.
So I just wanted to show its ability to go to the county level And then the targets change for the county. And eventually there's a town toggle that once we have those numbers, we'll be able to zoom into towns and say,
Randy's doing that right now.
Yeah.
He's just like, June, going.
and the only thing I would
He's got my
know.
house pulled up.
Barn has a house number. My cottage, which is livable, does not. This is 0 Highgate Road.
Well, that's what, hopefully this will fix.
Yeah.
Great.
The only other thing I would note in terms of like, and it says it here, because we didn't have a baseline for what pace towns are on, we use the average of 21 to 24 in terms of what these regions have been producing, versus the target. So that's how this is.
Sorry, where do we see that?
So, where up here is the target for the county. And then the second number, the 861, is on pace to build 861 by 2030. You need 3,600 by 2030. And then it shows the annual need of 728 and your annual average of 172.
And I would venture to guess, other than Chittenden County, that this is not a unfamiliar disparity.
The speedometer is mainly in the red.
Yeah, the speedometer is so much in the red.
Yeah.
And so that is a stark, number disparity that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, we hope to continue to make this
Absolutely.
more accurate and more real time as we.
This is great. And I urge us all to go onto your dashboard because we're all sorts of figuring things.
Yes.
Great. That is great table setting. For our last 20 minutes, we're going to shift to, Thomas.
No.
Madam
Okay.
Chair, could I add something?
Laura. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
absolutely.
Apologies. And Nate
Don't
did a
jump
great
right in.
job.
As you know, this is sort of a conversation. I'm happy to have people join it. Keep joining.
Apologies, but I just want to point out that the dashboard is such a great visual representation, and as Deputy Commissioner pointed out, VHFA was a part of setting some of these numbers. The numbers on the target, so I just want to point out, we did set low and high estimates of what was going to be needed into the future.
Yeah.
And the ones on the dashboard are the high estimates. So I
Are
just
the
want
what?
the high
Okay,
estimates.
that was one of the words you meant. Okay.
So I just want to make sure that the senators realize that while it is in the red, if the dashboard, and it would be too confusing to explain to the public that there's a band of, low and high based on demographic changes that we expect in the future. But it is important to know that those are the high estimates, because to the point that was raised earlier about the idea of new construction versus adding units, it does freak out some communities to see such high numbers. And sometimes it's helpful to point out to communities that those are the highest estimates we have, and that there could be demographic changes that lead to not quite as many units being needed in the future.
So noted. Thank you. Okay. Jill and Tim. Nate, thanks a million.
You are welcome.
And there's a seat right here and behind. Oh, there's a seat right here that Joe brought in for you.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Jill Remick. I'm the Director of Property Valuation and Review at the Tax Department. So while I like you all a lot, I haven't been.
Yeah, you haven't been in this committee for a while.
No.
It is good to have you.
Thank you. So just for context, real quick, so Property Valuation and Review is a division within the Tax Department that works with listers and assessors and town clerks and treasurers to administer maintaining the statewide education grand list and most of the components of the statewide education property tax system. So to cut to the chase, I'm hoping this is a relatively straightforward act, and we're very supportive of the language being in here. We have also floated it by the CAMR providers, that's the computer assisted mass appraisal software vendors. And
Thank you. I had
listers
totally
and
forgotten
assessors.
what camera stood for.
Yeah,
It's
so
computer
computer
assisted.
assisted mass appraisal.
Yeah, that's right.
So again, just for sort of big picture, each municipality is responsible for maintaining their municipal grand list and their education grand list. They do that valuation of those properties in the CAMA system locally. So they have the option of using whatever CAMA systems, the valuation system that they use. And so they plug in things like bedrooms, grade, neighborhood, materials,
The
all
Mystic Cottage.
that. Garage, stories, things like that, into their valuation system, and they come up with the value that shows up on our property tax bill. So, and then that information that we need for maintaining the education grand list is pulled from that CAMA database already into the statewide grand list software. So what's articulated in here is happening for the pieces of data that we already need for the statewide education grand list and for education property tax billing. So this is one of those lovely things that is not adding to lister and assessor plates. It's actually that we would just work with the CAMA vendors who we've already talked about this. Like I said, this is information that lives in their system. It's public information, which also makes this a lot easier, right? I even just double checked before I came in. I can go on to montpeliervermont.org and I can see my house and the year it was built and the siding and stuff like that and what it's assessed for. So this is one of those sort of lovely things where we've actually got a channel to pull in this information, and the fields that we are contemplating pulling up, as Nate mentioned, you know, the year built, right, number of stories, number of units are objective, right? They're not part of the sort of maybe subjective or valuation decisions. These are
Actually,
numbers.
year built is not
Well, that's
an
true.
objective.
My house
That's
is
a
a
fact.
That's what I meant. I'm sorry if I misspoke. Yeah, it's a fact, right? So although my house was a little ranch and then we've added a full story. Yeah. So was it built in 1980 or was it built in 2016? But those sort of
It
things
was
are
built
tracked.
in 1980 and added onto.
Yes.
My house is very questionable and it's debatable when it was built.
18th century.
Yeah, so it goes back, it was a structure in 1836, then it was a house, and then it wasn't. So there's questions of the old Vermont homes, but
Yes.
Absolutely.
Right. So this is a start. So I think the idea is we would start with, and again, I would defer to Tim and Nate on the exact specifics, but we would facilitate sort of adding those few fields that we could start to collect. And yeah, there over time, the data quality will only improve, right? But this seems like it's sort of the path of least resistance. It's public information already collected in one spot, and there's already an existing channel for that information to come up to the state. So rather than adding to anyone's plate or trying to create a new separate collection, this is just how can we grab this stuff already?
Got it. And that is what was brought to us, I think initially by Maura. Thank you, Maura, yet again. And it doesn't, just before I go to Randy, it doesn't ask the individual town clerks to have to upload this. We can get this directly through CAMA.
Right, so we would work with the CAMA vendors to add those fields in there. We literally have an extract that we pull.
So, and then the listers and the assessors just simply add to the field that it's already been created by CAMA.
Right.
So they don't have to individually create these additional fields.
Exactly.
And so then once they do their annual by April 1st, we should have an updated vision for each town.
Yeah, that was an important point. Thank you for saying that. So the grand list is set as of April 1 each year. It is a snapshot in time that the property tax and assessment and all those pieces are based on. So this will not be sort of a fluid daily, you know,
Right.
okay,
This
this
is a
was
once-a-year
updated.
update.
Yes, this would be a concrete snapshot in time. We do collect it a few times a year. Like we get a preliminary grand list in August after tax bills have gone out, and then there's final in January. But just for the purposes of like, this is not going to be sort of like a regular tracking this percentage of construction, for example. Like that wouldn't be what this would do, but this would provide that snapshot in time from the CAMA system that already exists.
Perfect. Randy, you have a question.
It's a question. So how frequently are errors detected in the data that you have? And if so, what do you do with it? How do you resolve it?
Sure. Tim Choi, VCGI. We're not tax. We are not.
We know you're not
ACCD. We are the Agency of Digital Services. So the nice thing about us is we have to work horizontally. But some of the things that we have to do.
You work horizontally.
Yeah, across government, meaning integrated across government rather than governmental silos.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, but
They work in bagels.
yeah. Sometimes I work, not vertically. But yes, we have to build tools like these map tools that the general public uses, even though it's not our information. So this is a day-to-day kind of thing. For one of which is the Vermont Parcel Viewer that showcases the grand list joined parcel map statewide. And these are some of the most used tools that are map-based on behalf of the state of Vermont and state. It is common that there are errors. But the point being is that the more sunlight you put on these, the more recourse you have to go back to the towns or the listers, assessors, and questions to make those subsequent updates and get it closer to what it should be whenever those are noticed. So the
How
general
does it come
practice.
to you?
What's that?
Does it come to you solely from the towns or can the public report? inherit to you?
We get, so the parcel data comes from two general places. We get the education grant list from our colleagues at tax, and that's a once-a-year current thing that's joined with the map.
The April 1 date.
Yeah.
Span stuff.
It has the,
Yeah.
and it all works. The magic following the theme here is based on the span, which is the unique identifier statewide. The shapes on the map, the parcel properties comes from the towns on behalf of the vendors who work for towns on behalf of them on a rolling basis. So when they do an update, they submit it to us and we process it usually in a matter of a week or two, and then it's live on a town by town. They get cut out and they republish. How the proposed CAMA data would work here, just want to bring that back and why we're in the room, is that because CAMA is about the quantitative descriptors of properties and buildings upon them, so too can they be related with things like existing parcel data, so that you can see a more comprehensive picture of what's actually going on a property by property basis. That's kind of our goal, because it serves the constituency wholesale in an easy way.
Right. And this is exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I realize that we have not asked you, as we often do, for our committee,
maps.
For our committee map
Yeah.
and where we all located, because we used to always do that and we haven't done that this year, which is.
Well, just like my question, and really a concern is you mentioned that there are potentially lots of errors, and are the errors being corrected, and how long does it take to happen, and what's the process for being notified of an error? Now, I have a specific situation which I was looking at again today online, in which my property by far belongs to somebody else according to the span map, which it doesn't. I've lived there for 40 years. There's another parcel, a home on the property, a cottage that has no number. There are others I go up and down the road that have no numbers to them, and they've been there for years. I'm just wondering, and the town is aware that there are errors.
Yeah.
So that's why I raised the question: how do you get this stuff fixed?
Yeah.
It's great to have the data, but if the data is inaccurate, what good is it?
There's a whole other separate piece that Jill and us and the tax department have worked on, which was the reappraisal bill, which is effectively about what the statewide, what we call statewide parcel program, that is currently voluntary right now. So towns are submitting data to us that includes this information on a voluntary basis. Not to get too far in the weeds there, but most people won't know that there's an error unless we make it available. So the very first step is indeed making it accessible, and we're there. The best that we can do, because it's not effectively our data, is to have a clear and simple set of rules, like if this thing, call your clerk, or if it's an E911 error, it has to go to the E911 coordinator because it's about addressing. It could be any one of those factors. But I also want to step back and say it's also why we have a disclaimer as soon as you read these. These are not for conveyance. They are not legal. Go to the town office if you need that kind of information. They're not the same.
So to go to the reappraisal work that you're doing with the towns and requiring, remind me, did we put piece of that into action last year, and we're now are we on Ways and Means building out further?
Right, so Act 68
You just be kind of
2023
Yeah.
did create a 6-year reappraisal cycle, which is great. So gosh, I could spend an hour talking about reappraisals. Act 68 of 2023.
That's right.
So it put a few things in place and there's a progress report and then a final report from the tax department on the legislative report page that VCGI had a huge hand in helping us articulate. But basically, so the municipalities have to reappraise all properties within their bounds. Prior to this bill, there wasn't a timeline. It was either voluntarily or based on an order that we issue based on the results of their equalization study. So their common level of appraisal and their coefficient of dispersion. And so now we're moving to what is sort of the national standard and pretty widely welcomed 6-year reappraisal cycle. So everyone will be on a cycle. The firms can sort of staff appropriately. The towns can count on that this will happen on a regular basis. Because some of the grand lists were, 15 years old. And so the way that you folks might hear about that is if your constituents are saying, my tax,
Well, we all know that because our taxes are.
Yes. So that's one of the main pieces that came out of that bill. And then we're also just moving towards some resolution on how we can support municipalities in working together to actually sort of contract in those 6-year clumps together. 'Cause right now it's still town by town contracting.
Yes, you're encouraging us to regionalize it.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
So education and PBR moving in sync. The question I have for this committee, here is another workforce development opportunity because we do not have enough appraisers in this state. We've had to contract at great expense outside of state. And we just need to take that on board and figure out how we can do that and where in our education system we could be encouraging
Yeah.
people to do that work.
It's kind of a fascinating opportunity because it's
to
be, you can be a real estate appraiser and there is a licensure through Secretary of State's, but there is not sort of a similar for municipal assessors or municipal appraisers. There are certainly like general appraisers and there are commercial, right? So there are very specific specialized folks, right, to do fashion.
Yeah, if you want to sell your home, you contract with your local appraiser
Yeah.
and they come and
Right.
we don't
So-
have the same thing for town.
Right, so the reappraisal firms are staffing up their folks. A lot of Vermont, there are Vermont reappraisal firms certainly, and they're doing a huge amount of this work. But there isn't a set career path. There isn't like, I'm on the board of the Central Vermont Career Center. Like there are great job opportunities and people who are in the field say, you kind of get to make your own hours. You're traveling around the state, you're talking to people if you're interested in real estate. Like it is a very great opportunity, but it's just how do you.
So here's an opportunity. We can create a pathway for this because this is definitely a workforce need in this state. So let's work on that in our capacity.
The other piece that came out of Act 68, and I realize I've really taken you off the rails here, but is requiring lister and assessor certification through PBR. So we actually are standing up a required certification program. It had been voluntary, and we rely heavily on International Association of Assessment Officers for the nationally recognized certification that courses. And then we put on a lot of Vermont specific ones, right? Like Vermont statutes, Vermont current use, Vermont homestead, all the things that are specific to Vermont. Our staff are training folks in every year. And then we also contracted a few experts for.
And that was voluntary.
Right. And as of this coming January, it will be.
It's required. Which, thank you.
So I think I want to make sure you have enough time.
No.
Yeah, I don't have much more other than I would love to answer any other questions you have beyond that.
You want to show off your wonderful website and how we can illustrate some of what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, sure, live demos are always potentially at risk, but let's see, what we can do here.
We love VCGF. It's always great to see it in action.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell my 4-year-old daughter.
Brandy's Cottage is a good.
We were called magicians often, so not magicians.
This is a magical morning. Clearly.
Yeah. Let's see if we can share my screen.
And while you're setting that up, I think as Maura was saying earlier, right, it's gonna take a while. This is not gonna be perfect, right? Like
not yet.
Yeah.
It's gonna get there.
It will, and as Tim, I think that was a really good way to put it, right? Like if we're collecting it, we're looking at it, that makes it 6 times.
Yeah, just to give you an idea, this is all leveraging existing resources within the state of Vermont.
So what town are you zooming
I'm
in?
in Barrytown. There's actually a
Okay,
border
let's
right
look
there.
at Barry.
Yeah, so the ortho imagery, the pictures from above you see here, this is already things we've done for many, many years. So all of the housing information that would be, aided by having CAMA data here has these other spatial information resources to build upon, whether it's E911 addresses, roads, other information. So it's just simply adding a robustness to the information that's already in existence.
So
when you click on a dot, if you will, it tells you the source of data, unit count, these kinds of things.
Can you click on a dot and show us?
Yeah, on the right hand, let me make sure that this
So
is
they
out of the
keep
way.
moving around. Yeah, I
So
see.
You see how you clicked on a dot there, unit count, site type, it says a condominium, these kinds of things, source of data. That's to date, we heavily have to rely on, one data set because it's the best of its kind, but it's certainly not perfect. And our partners at E911, as Nate mentioned before, are working to have a place for where the CAMA data regarding housing units in your bill can be inserted such that it's all consistent.
So just on this, the sort of electric yellowy green.
Yep. Chartreuse.
The Charlotte. That is existing units and then the bluey greeny ones are new.
No,
built.
these are single and multi. So the teal is single family,
But it
single.
says units built, so are those newer units that have come back online
Yeah,
or are
yeah.
these all older units that just exist?
Yeah, these are in the time frame as it says above there, 2021 to current.
So that's actually a lot of multifamily units in Barry.
We were a bit surprised too. I live in Barry, so it helps you see things that you may not be aware of just by, being able to come in on a virtual airplane.
Yes, because you showed us, you went through a bunch of different maps and there
Yeah.
were a lot of those multifamily units
Yeah.
that have been either built or brought back online.
And I do want to reiterate the point about how this data corrected, since this has gone live in January of this year, we get emails or calls saying, hey, I built this, I'm a developer, I built 8 units in Brattleboro. or
Thank
around
you,
here."
Jay.
And they say, can I get this added to the map? And there is a process for which we can accommodate that. So yeah, just being able to see it easily on a map, zooming in, you can do this on your phone. Provided you have, data access, it allows you to see what's going on where, across the state.
So are the bigger dots?
The bigger dots mean
multi-
more, they're scaled to more, meaning like if it's bigger, there's, actual more units in that vicinity.
But this is like encouraging.
Yeah.
I mean, to see all these.
See some more dots.
Yeah, we want more dots, generally speaking, is the high level, yeah.
Right. Anything else to add before we go to the floor?
Great work.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you for your work.
Yep, of course.
Thank you, Heidi. We can